Hello everyone, and welcome to another Strange Loop Games stream here in preparation for update 10. And we finally have a Friday stream again. Hopefully we're back on a more normalized schedule and we don't have too many instructions going on for the just the general streams coming up. And today we have an interesting subject that we haven't really talked about much in either public notifications and the just the general chatter until a couple of days ago, and that is our changes to how plants are initially spawned when you create a new world. And kind of cutting directly into it, we have had sort of during the process of 9.0 development, we've had a kind of overflow and abundance of wild crops due to changes to the world generation when we transitioned over from 8.3 up to 9. And we had some accidents going into 9.0 and into 9.1 if you do go back and check those versions. But through the transition of 9 and then through our development up to 10, we kind of agree with all the players' notion in that this whole blanket coverage that we have right now is not really something that we find acceptable from our side. So for 10 here, we decided to kind of rework that and make sure that it feels a lot more natural and a lot more approachable, and just it feels more like an environment you would expect to find rather than something that just have this corn all over. And I think there's not really a whole lot to say other than kind of just getting straight into it. Let me just find where I that sure that we're spawning a new world as well. So there's a couple of new restrictions with the new spawner. That is something that we wanted to make sure that players have access to, and or admins in general. They can tweak these settings and they can manipulate and edit them as they require. So there is a lot of user access. Let me just this, and we can transfer to just the eco background while the server is starting up again. So when I'm saying clusters, we are looking at just general zones of crops availability. So we are moving away from the whole idea of everything is available in all biomes. And you will have areas, say grassland for instance, where you don't have these crops, versus other areas where there will be more of a dense area of them. Almost ready here. Maybe, possibly. Yeah, it's just taking a bit longer. Do we have changes to water mechanics are planned. They just didn't fit in with the scope of 10. We do have some ideas for how we wanted them to be behaving more in terms of like flowing water. The altitude level differences are supposed to be more curved / linear rather than this kind of blocky nature of it. And yeah, I think it's just gonna be looking a lot nicer. Sorry for kind of got caught up with some pre-testing and making sure that the resolution changes for the stream is working. I hope everyone is having a good visual point of it. I changed out so it's not limited to 1080 anymore. It should be 144. So do let me know in chat if there is something that, or if it's not working, or if it's being misbehaving. Yeah, I think Dennis helped me go through and make sure that it kind of worked, but when it comes to the multi-stream place where we're streaming out to Facebook and Steam and all of the other platforms, We can't really do dry tests of that, so we kind of test it locally for some of them in private mode, but for Twitch, for instance, it doesn't allow that. We kind of... You're kind of left to hope and make sure that that works. So we have a default sized 0.52 kilometer world, so this is the regular start spawning that will be showing off here for a little bit. I'll go through all the different changes as we move through it, and also showing off the new debug command that admins have access to be able to determine how things are spawning. Yeah, thank you for the feedback. It seems like it's working on both Twitch and YouTube all right. It wants to let me in here. Yeah, so crops have been switched around. I'm sort of in the process of making a PR to make sure that it goes in as quickly as possible for the playtest. But we have moved some crops over. So wetlands, for instance, as I've shown on Discord, no longer has all the mushrooms. The fly caps or the amita mushrooms have been moved over to the warm forest, and the bolete over into the cold forest. And the criminy is more prone to change out the layer here. So this is something that hopefully everyone is convenient. Yeah. This is something that I'm hoping everyone is kind of adjusted to in terms of visual. The new spawn system, so when you join in on a server, you get these nice little clustered notifications as to where you can spawn and what these locations are providing, and this is something that we want more feedback on, and we're kind of trying to refine these to make more, to be both location wise making more sense, but also be more approachable for general users. So here we have a quite clean map. We've got a decent sized desert to kind of show off how that generation is working. We've got a wetlands going on here. There's some different temperature variations. We got warm forest covering the wetlands and then over to the rainforest. But if we start here over in the grassland, so fly here, nuke off the tutorial. I forgot to change the pants on the character, so we do have some issues with some glitching avatar clothing when you're flying. That it shows up some of the textures are rendering through, so do bear in mind that it is a work in progress, and that specific issue right now is only affected to if you're using admin flight. So yeah, here we have some images of the new grassland, which, as you can see, there is still, you know, a concerning amount of corn here, you might think. There's some bunchlings here and general aesthetic changes. We also have some beets, tomatoes. But as you can see, these are now properly grouping in small kind of reference, mistaking a bit sometimes. I can sometimes refer to these as clusters, but they are defined as groups on the server. And a cluster contains of multiple groups. So in this case, we have the patch here in front, and then we have the one on the right here that is a small group. And then these are set as these are variables set on the actual plant script. So you can set how many you want to be spawning at a low range in a group, and then a cap of how many you want to top spawn in a group. And then it'll randomize in between those, place the group, and then it'll be at a bit of a limit range, a range limit on how often it can place groups and how, what are the proximity in between these. So this is the grassland, and this is somewhere where we have quite an abundance of corn. So if we grab the map here, and we can hop up to head over north, and just to kind of clean off the grassland. the ice that spawns randomly in the desert is an oddity. It's sometimes the temperature ranges doesn't really seem to be working the way we want them to be working. If we go into temperatures, I think it's because it freaks out a little bit in terms of like it caps out the temperature, so it's the whole temperature ranges is something that I'll be looking over as we go through the playtest as well to kind of minimize those issues. Yeah, basically it's like it goes up to 1 and then it kind of freaks out and doesn't really know what to do with that temperature. So as we move along here in the grassland, you can see you're no longer seeing corn. And that is because the corn has a cluster that it's spawned regionalized at the bottom there. Any plans for transitioning biomes? I believe you're thinking of like intermediary biomes where you have like a hybrid between a grassland and a cold forest, for instance. There is some experimentations towards that, but I believe it's going to be more inclined to be like proper subtype biomes. To kind of deal with that tic-tac-toe situation where you can't have a grassland towards a tundra, for instance. Tundra is always covered about, if I show you on the map here, go biomes, you can see that the tundra, for instance, is always this kind of bordering around the actual frozen ice biome. And then it kind of trickles down into taiga and then into cold forest, kind of evens out at the temperature as you're going down. And this is where the rules and regulations of this comes into play. You have a bit of overlap here, as you can see with taiga biome kind of trickling down into the cold forest. And this is areas where you're going to be able to see these kind of overlap in either tree types that are growing into other biomes, even though they're not actually allowed to be that. And more of these kind of rule sets will help refine the biome generator, but at the same time, the more rules you're adding onto the as restrictions onto which biomes can be adjacent to which biomes, you're also making the world less unique, as they'll be more similar to each other the more rules you have. So we are trying to keep it somewhat realistic, at the same time trying to kind of keep it somewhat of a unique map every time you generate it. But more biome types will possibly happen, but there is a risk of us only using them for larger preset maps, so you might not have all biome types on smaller maps just because the world generator gets really cranky when you have too small of a confined space and you need to disperse enough biomes inside that space. As for biome changes, they will happen. So this is something that is not super common. It's also not super often it does happen. But if you have temperature increases in the world due to pollution, at the moment it's currently flooding the world way faster than we would like it to, so that's something that I'll be taking a look at here after I'm done with these plant changes. Where if you rise up the temperature and it heats up, it'll start killing off the plants. And as it's killing off the plant, it reduces the amount of pollution these plants can take care of, which then kind of escalates the situation of world temperature rising, crops die off. But if the world temperature rises in grassland, for instance, it will start to transition over into biome and into sort of a desertification, as the temperature now kills off the grass plants and allows for desert plants to start growing there, because it still has enough moisture in certain areas, but it'll be dry and temperate enough for the cacti and kind of the yosho and those kind of brush to spread in there. So that's something that's always worked. It's just been an issue of pollution may not have been affecting the world too much. You might have had too few players for a big enough world, so you don't pollute it enough through your play cycle, which is something that is really touchy from a balance perspective, where we change out the values for pollution requirements or pollution vulnerability at a certain level. You have a server that might be the same size with 10 people as a server with 100 people, and then you've got the server with 100 people, they instantly vaporize their world and causes it to become a desert wasteland within a couple of days, versus the one with 10 that never even sees the change. So finding a good balance in between player population versus impact of environment is really tricky, and it is something that takes time, and something that we do want to kind of move into more as well. But I digress a little bit. So back on the plants, as was asked for about the corn, because corn is such an amazing versatile crop. We also wanted to biome. It's locked to being planted in grassland or forest adjacent because of the temperature and humidity requirements. So that's still a case. However, as you can see, there's not a corn in sight. And that is because if we use this fancy new debug command, we have world and then species, and then you can specify which species you want to take a look at, how it's spawned and how it's looking. So this is an admin command. So we do this, and we do that, and it'll show you how these clusters have spawned. And it'll also show you the groupings inside the cluster. And then it'll show you the range it's allowing to place new groups. So corn is a bit of a tricky plant. Kind of see that. I would have liked a bigger cluster for it. Might pick another plant. A little bit of kelp later. But here you can see that corn has been planted here. And you've got a couple of clusters here and over on this island over here. But the entirety of the rest of the area is completely corn-free. So what this has done is a couple of things, really. It's one, made sure that resources even inside the same biome is regionalized. So you don't have access to all crops regardless of the biome specification. And if we compare it to, let's grab, say, as you can see here, we have one of the filler crops that is planted inside the desert. And it's spawning inside and around the desert area where it's high enough moisture that it is liking that situation. But here you can also see the cluster. So this is a cluster radius where inside this area it's allowing to spawn the groups based on the distance. And the distance is limiting how many groups can be placed. And these are overlapping in between the clusters. And I do apologize for the kind of technical rant here. But as you can see here, for instance, we have a group that is spawned from this cluster here. That is in the middle. And then we have another one that spawned on the edge of the one cluster here. And then we have a third one that is spawning here, which is allowing these three to coexist way closer than they would normally do. But it is making it enough of kind of a flavor event that it looks more natural and it feels more natural when you are walking around in the world. And that's kind of true for everything. And there's a couple of technical hacks that you can do from a balance perspective with dealing with these different variables and kind of these new criteria for plants. So kind of clarify on, this is not changing out, or this system in itself is not changing out how plants can propagate or be planted or farmed. What it does is it's simply changing the behavior on how they initially gets populated into the world, which in turn has a massive impact on the availability, the geolocation, and the preference to where people want to live, or generally kind of visit and explore more to be able to get all the crops that they need. So, as you can see here, you got a couple of clusters, you got a couple of groups. And what if we have plants that we might not want to limit to specific clusters? Well, we have a couple of those that we have set up from the start, which one of them being a couple of the tree variations that you kind of want to guarantee that they're always covering the whole biome rather than just pieces of the biome, as well as the kelp, for instance, for the ocean. So for kelp, kind of did the other thing, and I will be showing a tech spreadsheet here during this, as we've promised spreadsheets for a long time now in the different streams, but haven't really lived up to it. Here we have kelp, for instance, where I've set the entirety of the world to be one cluster. And then it's simply spreading these groups in different variation sizes along the entire water. So these are spawning in clusters, and you don't have them randomly spawning in a giant spread of patches. So we go into the water here. You see you have a couple of loose ones spawning, and that's also a variable that we can show off as well that's working. So that you do have like a piece here and there and a couple of things overall. And then you have these bigger kind of groupings of them. Rather than having the entirety of the ocean to be just crammed with them. And this has been sort of an ongoing experimentation to make sure that we have these kind of kelp forest looking things. I am aware that the kelp is looking a bit sad, but we have something cooking for it, and I've talked it through with Milenko, and he has some ideas on how to do it from the art side, so we might see some improvements for those later on as well. Yeah, you have a lot more kind of environmental randomness to how these crops are spawning and how the plants are kind of propagating and going off in terms of the initial world feeding. And as we follow that, you can see the desert here. It's not a massive Joshua forest anymore. So the desert is a lot more scarce, which means you can't build an infinite amount of giant wooden structures without actually going back to the forest and kind of importing or transporting it over it. And this was also one of the big important changes that we felt that we really wanted to happen, where the desert just contained too much, and I think that's partially true for all of the biomes. And we have some prickle pears that likes to live on the edge near or closer to the wet areas of the biome. We have the barrel cactuses are now spawning in small groups as well. And personally, I think everything just feels more. It feels more even with less. That makes sense. Yeah, that's desert, and we got the grassland. You can see we're back in the corn area. And one of the risks that is kind of an analyzed risk, as we've had versions of eco prior that were really scarce in terms of resources, where it turned into brutal PvP almost, where people would scavenge crops as soon as they could, just because they really wanted to make sure that they got all the huckleberries on the map. So people would claim land next to them, hoping that it would spread to their property to be able to get access to it, because they had vicious economical monopoly on them. And moving towards that level is probably not something that we are particularly gunning for, but at the same time, we also realized that it is really hard to kill off the crops and plants in general, and that's just because there's too much of them in the world. So we're trying to kind of meet a middle ground there where they're scarce enough to be really important to keep producing and then keep making sure that they expand and are available to the general population that is coming in maybe day 2, day 3, day 4. But at the same time, if someone is really determined to really go out to grab all the beets in the world, or if there's a collaborative effort to just make sure that they have all the corn or something else, that should also be kind of an option. And then obviously, you know, laws and rules and regulations kind of come into that as well, where they might be able to incentivize repopulation of that crop in that area, because the animals are dependent on those crops. So somewhere you might see a poor elk dying off because there's not enough berries to eat, or things in those ranges where we're moving more animal dependency on certain crops. And here we have a next kind of biome that I've spent today kind of finished tweaking, making sure that the rice was playing nice. I was having some issues with the temperature gauging of it. But now you've got some clustering of the cotton. You got the button bush being clustered up as well and kind of spreading out. You do have more gaps in between. And as you can see, it is completely devoid of the mushrooms. And as said, we've got the criminy mushrooms that are spawning sporadically inside the grassland. And they are bordering a little bit into the forest here. And you've got pumpkins spawning in the warm forest. So they'll be spawning around semi-moistured areas. You've got the camas bulbs here as well, giving a bit of a flowery look to it, and some breakup in the green monotony color. But as you can tell, it is more clean. It is more sporadic in terms of where you can find the crops. Yeah, no, the swampland isn't the mushroom land anymore. You got some amanita mushrooms there. And this is true for all the biomes. So I did want the warm forest to kind of have this lush greenery point to it, which makes it at the moment it's kind of difficult to gauge whether or not you're going from grassland into warm forest, but that's also part of the aesthetic that I've wanted with it. So you don't have this distinct huge border gap where it just like completely changes out. So if we head over into the Taiga area, past the desert here, move on to the opposite end of the grassland where we're moving into the cold forest, and we've got the bolete mushrooms that are coming in here and the salal plants, and this is where you get more of a scarcity due to the cold weather. And you've got fern is one of the common plants, so that does grow in both forest types. And then you've got beans here. You also have huckleberries, which are a lot more scarce than they were before. So I am expecting farmers and gatherers to kind of coexist a little bit in agreeing between consumption of wild plants versus propagating and farming and making sure that you get fields going, because they will spread and populate on their own, of course. But it is, you know, you imagine you're following through here and you've got 20, 30, 40 different players that all wants to consume the same amount of resources. If you're not careless on the initial days in terms of making sure that you get some of those farms going, you might actually run out of these crops and you'll start to struggle, which is part of the design goal. We want to make sure that it's kind of pushed towards more sustainable farming and sustainable consumption that we really haven't had in 9 at all. So that's something I'm looking forward to see feedback on, and you know, screenshots from either great successes or horrible failures. And also cut down some of the plants in the taiga biome to make sure that it kind of reflects and looks the same way as the rest of them. Just moving along here, and I'll skip over into the really technical things. Yeah, it's really a matter of making sure that you're picking the crops before you fell the trees, because you can't be completely irresponsible to, like, you know, oh, but there's 200 other corn over there, so I'll just, you know, don't care about these two. Those two might save your life here. But yeah, no, I'm quite happy with how it turned out, and I'm hoping that it's gonna be a huge impact on everyone's gameplay, for hopefully mostly positive experience. And yeah, it's been a ride trying to get this plant stuff to work and making sure that it looks all right and it's populating. For we kind of go on to the plant thing. So just to kind of reiterate that this is something that we did to make sure that the initial plant world gen spawn works nicely and kind of fits into the world size scale. So these clusters that we shown you here, let's see if we're gonna do, what do we want to do? Let's do beets. So these clusters are dynamically scaling in size with the world size. So if you make these, if you generate a lot bigger world, these will be a lot bigger to kind of compass and be affected by that. And that in itself will allow more groups to be spawned into it. See here. The world is the default sized one. So this is 0.52 kilometers. And I can grab an example here from, if we grab, got a screenshot from a, do that. So this is that too. Image here. This is a scale on a white tiger, sized 2.56 kilometers. So this is at the moment our biggest supported worlds, and this is how corn has spawned on that one. And I've done no changes to the corn from my small world that I have right now to this one in itself. So this covers, you know, like a sixth of the grassland, and it works the same way. This was just before we did the additional range limit view on the clusters. But here you can see the different variation sizes in the clusters, and they spawn a different amount in each grouping, of course. And if you compare it to where we're at now, you have these kind of, you know, they're proportionally the same size depending on the world scale. Hoping that kind of answers that question. And where were I? Oh, the seeds for decorative plants. Are you talking about making them like actual pickable and crafting into seeds so you can like plant them further, or just to kind of clarify that? They don't have specific items or like when you pick a flower, it turns into plant fiber because there is no specific item for that specific plant. So it's not really feasible in that sense. It is a good idea, and we do want more kind of decorative environmental plants, so it might be something that we take up. But not for 10, as it's gonna require more assets and icons and a myriad of other things, and we're gonna kind of swamped in terms of our workload for that, so quite possible for post 10. I mean, the seeds do kind of exist in code, so it wouldn't be too far-fetched if you would create just a small recipe mod for, say, turning plant fibers into these different seeds. But from a vanilla implementation point, probably not gonna happen until after 10 has been released. Yeah, I think I've ranted on quite a bit over how these things have been changed and how they're looking. I kind of wanted to go over the technical details for how to calibrate this. If you do want to change it yourself, or from a server management perspective. We can bring up this monstrosity here. So this is my spreadsheet that we're working on for when we're editing these plants and all the items in the game and Excel sheets. When we're doing changes to different things that are automatically generated, which is what's referred to as content inside the autogen folder for the server. All of this is kind of fetched and kind of printed automatically, which is why we're using an Excel to kind of keep all the data structure correctly. And for the new plant system, we have these, what is it, like 12 things, I think it is. Which kind of going over here in a second, but this is kind of how it's looking when I'm setting these up. So you've got temperatures and everything, and the dayline levels and all that. And then you have all of these kind of variables that gets plugged in, and this will be determining how it's spawning, where it's spawning, which biome it's referring to, the size of the cluster, the radius size in plot counts, and all of that kind of things. So how is this looking inside the actual scripts? Well, do this here. If we do that, let me know if it's legible. Kind of hard to tell on my preview. So inside the plant folder, or the specific plant that you are looking into, which is inside the server mods, core folder, autogen, and then the plant folder. All the plant types now have this new generation for it. Previously it just had the height for it, but now it has all of these new parameters that allows you to kind of dictate how you want these to be working. So you've got the chance to be spawned outside of the group, and this is a percentage from 1 to 0 on the frequency chance that a plant decides to not be a part of a group and just spawn outside the group somewhere in the valid area. And then you have minimum distance between the groups. So that is doing this as reference in at the same time. But do with the kelp, because so the valid distance between the groups is between these 2 points. And this is in tile radius. So this is going to be 25 tiles up to a maximum distance of 40 tiles as the center, the distance between the center points of these 2 groups. And then you have the direct amount of actual crops allowed to be planted in that group. So this is a low value to a high value, same as the other ones. And this is allowing us to be making sure that it is a minimum of 8 rice plants, assuming that it is habitably safe for those 8 plants. It might be a little bit lower if it decides to not be able to spawn all of those 8 plants. And then up to a top number of 16. And then for the rice, because I needed to make sure that the rice is contained inside the wetlands, there's a combination of things happening here. That if we grab the pumpkin, as the pumpkin has actual clusters set. So here you can see that the count of cluster is 3 to 7, and that is the amount of big blobs that the groups can spawn in, which is a fantastic technical term, I promise you. And that is grab pumpkin. If we grab this, for instance, you see that we've got 3 clusters going on here. And these are overlapping a little bit, and that's perfectly fine. And so it spawned the minimum amount of clusters that it can on this map. And then it can spawn an excess. And then you've got the radius of the group, which is the circumference of the actual group. So this, if you do want to be changing this and kind of testing it around, you might need to be tweaking this a little bit back and forth and testing it. And then you have the total percentage world scale these clusters are sized in. And this is where, and of course you've got this start biome, which is a way to determine that a plant is only allowed to start in this biome, but it may be habitably acceptable in multiple biomes. So the mushrooms, for instance, they can be placed and planted in 4 different biomes, but because this is set to warm forest for one of them and cold forest for the other, they're simply not allowed to initially spawn here. So for and this is, I'll be going over 3 different ways to make sure that these numbers before scaling for world size. Yeah, so this is the value for the world size. So we take corn, for instance. I think I had this slightly. Oh, I had it on 5 and 14. So this value here is the size of the cluster in the world, and as you can see, I have slightly different variables for the count of clusters, as well as the minimum distance on the groups to make sure that they're a bit further apart. But this is scaling to from 0 to 1, and if we go into the rice, you can see that I have this set as 1 to 1, and that is because I wanted the rice cluster to cover the entire planet. Just to make sure that I covered the whole biome and not just a random chance of a piece of the biome. And this was specifically for the rice in the wetlands, because wetlands is just a sub-biome. If we're looking at rice, you can see that the entire world is blue. That is because the entire world is a singular cluster. And then it's spawning the rice inside the biome that is available and limited to in that starter point. So I'm only allowing it to start in wetlands. If I'd remove this, it would be spawning all over the place in both the warmer forest as well as the grassland, which is a new thing in terms of restrictiveness. So previously, a lot of the plants were temperature balanced to be forced to spawn into certain biomes. So things would have a range of a specific habitability to make sure that it's only available to spawn inside a certain biome type. Whereas now we can pull back a bit on that and allow more plants to be spawned in different biomes, because we have this new variable that allows us to completely limit where things are kind of cropping up in the initial push. and then kind of let these dynamically grow and spread as they habitably can, or by players that wants to be farming this elsewhere. Yeah, chemical, as a question being, modern chemical industry relies on a multitude of strange and rare plants. It is a prospect, but it's also kind of part of a whole kind of segment of like a completely different set of industrial branch, if you will, rather than mechanical branch. It's a whole different subject, so that would be an interesting aspect and an area to kind of look into. But it is also really, really big because it's something that wouldn't be touched lightly. It is. It has a unique importance, but at the same time, it also has some unique impacts, which we would want to reflect properly. So, like things like that is always kind of rotating around in terms of design and on the planning board and kind of debated and pushed around. But it is something that we also don't want to touch until we know that we can do it correctly and in a way that we want it to be representative in the game. Another question being, is there any plans to change / buff the wild gathering talents on gatherers? There will likely be some talent changes along the way because we do have some ideas for just a general talent upgrade. Want to add some new unique ones for the crafting rather than kind of copy pasting over from one to another, but there are plans for them. But I'm not gonna be not gonna go into them too much here because of just want to finalize plans and make sure that I'm not speaking out of terms into what we have planned versus what might not happen. So I'm just gonna not go into that at the moment. Yeah. So got lost there. Where were I? So there's kind of 3 ways to go about this. One being you had the general kind of cluster, and these are spawning and propagating in different areas, as we've seen with the corn. And then you have this way of you have the entire world representative as one biome or one cluster, and then filters out where it's allowed to prop up based on the biome selection. And then you have something that visually doesn't really look nice on that map, but it is necessary nonetheless. And that is if you specify to make sure that it doesn't exist any cluster in the world at all, and then you just allow the plant to override the cluster functionality completely, which then makes it behave a bit more like the old plant system. I believe it was. Let's actually check. Did I do? Yeah, I got a couple of ones here. So we've got deer lichen and desert moss. Deer lichen. We got this, for instance, where I'm overriding the cluster restrictions and it's allowed to just spawn anywhere at a random rate inside the old forest or the taiga tundra area. As you can see, this map doesn't really help you in a lot in terms of like how it's spawning the groups, because the entire thing is like random groups all over because it doesn't have any restrictions. But it is another way to kind of make sure that you have these here. You kind of making sure that you have this layer coverage of the entire biome where you don't have any restrictions you want to impose on it other than, you know, it gets shoved out of the way when you have other plants cropping up, but you want to make sure that it is available all over the place without any specific kind of superficial restrictions on it. And I did choose Horrible Plant to kind of showcase it because it's murky green on murky green. Apologize for that. We got the desert moss being the same. Fur is doing the same thing as well, but I think Fur might be looking a little bit more horrendous on the map. Here we go. So as you can see here, it's kind of propagating it, and it looks kind of even, but it is also randomly placing it adjacent inside these borders, so they're not symmetrical, even though they might be looking like it. So this is a bit of a... It looks a bit false. But as you can see here, they're not really straight, and it's kind of planted where they make sense for the rest of the habitability restrictions. As well as the you specify how many plants you're looking at, and that'll kind of throw curveballs into it and make it more natural looking. Yeah, we're running up to close to an hour of me just babbling on about plants, which I guess is a positive effect, that considering the title of the game. So we are, as you can tell with this one, we are moving back more in towards focusing on some of the environmental changes, some of the world gen changes, and more into just the environment in general. We've got a lot of things in civics that is coming. We've got a lot of things kind of tucked away and finalized during our update progression through the entire 9 series. So we are kind of happy to do more focus on to just plants and general environmental balance. So more focus to that. Yeah, I think we've got 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'm probably gonna wrap this up for the evening. In what is the order for interspecies plants to spawn in case of overlapping? Which one will be decided to be spawned? It does a bit of a tug of war. So depending on, and this is something that kind of gets calibrated in with these settings as well. Let's use the straight code just because it looks neater than the Excel, I think, for visualization. So for a group, you set the specific size of the group itself, and then you specify how many plants are allowed to randomize generate inside that group setting. So if your lowest sized group contains less plants than your highest count plants in group, then you are gonna end up with kind of these very symmetrical squared patches, because the entire tile is filled with plants, and that'll just prevent other plants from kind of intertwining and be mixed in a bit with it. So I do recommend that you kind of keep a little bit of a curb on it, so you do end up with something similar to this here, where this whole thing is a group, but because it's not completely packed, it does allow some general mix in between. As for which group would take precedence, I believe it's not really... I would almost say alphabetical. I can't really tell for sure, because there is some hidden magic where it kind of loops around and does multi-passes, and it also depends on which biome it's in. So, you know, it might generate the desert, and then it starts propagating and checking the habitability levels. But I'd strongly recommend to not try to do this like super filled things. And other than other than the general super reliant, like the superimposed rules and regulations for the groupings, the plant spawning system in itself is still working fairly similar to how it's always worked before. It does check for things like capacity, it checks for habitability, the moisture level, the temperatures. So that's your kind of regulatory factor in terms of where plants would like to spawn. And then you have these kind of group dynamic settings that overrides it, and adds a layer of restrictions on top of it to make sure that it spawns in these groups and not just willy-nilly all over the place. Any plans for other weapons besides bows for hunting? No. I know that it's not something that a lot of people wants to hear, but we do have kind of a standpoint on just generally things like firearms and so on and so forth. It's been discussed quite a lot in the modding community, as well as been requested quite a few times over on general Discord. But the official general standpoint is that it's not going to happen. If someone wants to mod them in and kind of, you know, run with them on their server and do their own thing, that's perfectly fine. But it's not something that's going to be added from a vanilla standpoint, at least. It just kind of goes against what the general design idea is, and it's really disruptive. Even at kind of a muffled level, it is kind of a nuisance if you suddenly start to hearing 40 people trying to run around in the forest shooting things with firearms rather than just hearing a muffled little arrow going off. Will we be able to influence moisture and temperature with canals and greenhouses? Greenhouses isn't a thing in vanilla. You do have some of it from the modding community. And at the moment, at least, we feel like it is, from our point of view at least, it's an essential to get these core functionalities going first and making sure that the general environment impact is high enough before kind of poking into that more. Moisture and temperature levels with canals and greenhouses, or just the canals in general, it's part of something that I'm conceptualizing for more subtype biomes. As talking about biome generation and so on, I do want it to be having more of a general impact. So instead of just rivers arbitrarily kind of dropped down onto the world, I would like them to be their own type of biome that kind of gets shuffled through on the world. So anytime you have a river, you have a more impactful kind of greenery around the specific area, but it's not something that's likely go into 10. But it is a constant improvement and something that is it's something that we constantly see from when we're doing improvements to the environmental side of things. As for animal husbandry, I do have a stream where we talked a little bit over it. Went over some of the flowcharts with some ideas and drafts for it. So it is being planned for. There hasn't really been anything starting for it, but it is outside of kind of drafting and planning and from my end, making sure that we cover our corners in terms of what we want to accomplish with it, how it's supposed to be interactive in terms of gameplay, and kind of the role it's supposed to fill in its impact in the environment, and kind of the cycle of improvements from back and forth. And yeah, that kind of goes into the the answer for a question regarding industrialized scaled production of things like meat/wool and animal produce and protein acquisition and so on and so forth. It actually might. I'm kind of terrified to test it now because it might explode. I do know that I think it's limited to plants. It could be, but there is an interesting side effect because the clams and urchins are actually plants in terms of code. So you could check clams and urchins there. But we will be adding more of these kind of debug commands that are available to users or to admins when it makes sense and when we have things that you can manipulate that would make those commands useful. And animals will get a proper pass when we do go into the animal husbandry and start working on it for real. Yeah. I believe that's kind of everything I had to say about plants for this time. Hope everyone enjoyed it. Hope it answered a few questions. Maybe it made it kind of arose a few others in terms of what will be coming. But yeah, so one of the sneak features that we're kind of doing some major overhaul improvements onto for 10. And with that, I will say goodnight and hope you have a continued great weekend and wish you well. Take care.